When you think of a bank robbery on horseback and guns blazing, you probably think of the Wild West. And Bentonville has a history of both the Wild West and the Old West.
Nobody had a gun. It was like Andy Griffith around here.
This bank robbery occurred in June 1893 at 2:30 in the afternoon.
It was said that it was like a thunderclap. It was such a surprise when they robbed the bank.
Bentonville. Today, we think of bicycles, trails, coffee, and yes, even Walmart. But what if I mentioned rifles, money, bandits? Well, let's take a trip and go back to where it all began.
It was 1836 when Arkansas became a state, Benton County became a county, and a county needing a county seat, Bentonville became the county seat.
The myth in our heads of the Old West and everybody carrying a gun is not true.
Well, you got to remember that this wasn't too long after the Civil War. Bentonville was totally destroyed. There was only 12 buildings left after the Civil War.
They were struggling to try to right the ship. They wanted to get back on their feet again. And that's something that Bentonville has always done. They've always tried to reinvent themselves and recover from one thing or another.
The town was laid out in 1837, which included the town square. Lots were plotted off and actually started being sold at that time. So if you're ever downtown at the square, look around, and it's nice to think that this is probably the oldest public space in the whole county.
So this was just a period of 28 years or so after the Civil War, and the town had slowly but surely rebuilt. It was probably at that point in time, probably a population of about 500 people.
Bentonville is the oldest town, oldest incorporated town.
It was a farming community. It was quiet, but it was pretty well established.
By 1893, when the robbery took place, well, the population was probably over 2,000.
Nobody had a gun on the day that the robbery occurred. It was just that quiet of a town.
A lot of the people of the town showed a lot of bravery that day.
They got whatever weapons they could and started firing back.
It was just so unheard of. I think that to have a gun battle in the middle of Bentonville was so unheard of that they never forgot it.
Just to get an idea of what the town looked like back then, this would be a picture of the Terry Block building and the bank building across the street. This is what the town would look like back around the 1880s. Here's a picture of what would be today known as the north side of the Bentonville Square. That big building located on the one side would be the Benton County Courthouse up until 1929. This picture would show what it looked like looking north along Main Street at that point in time, the route that the bank robbers would have taken. This is a picture of the People's Bank from the point in time of the Bentonville bank robbery. As you can tell, it's kind of primitive. There's a fence around the square at that point in time. There's also a well on the Bentonville Square at that point in time.
We had two banks, one of those being the People's Bank, which we'll talk about, and the other was right across the street, and it was the Benton County National Bank.
It was where everybody kept their money, and that was another reason why it was so important to them, was that it was the bank where everybody's money was.
There was no guarantee from FDIC or government guarantees or anything. That was their money, so they were ready to defend it.
By the time of the bank robbery, especially the strawberry business was really big. It was said that they had actually sent a packet of currency to St. Louis the day before the robbery because they had so much money at the bank that they would send it to the local Fed that would take care of their cash for them. And so there wasn't actually as much money in the bank as there normally was.
This is the teller's cage from the People's Bank, made famous in 1893. This area is the cashier's, which there's a bit of a glare, but this is this area right here. This is the assistant cashier's, which is this area right here. We also have the side pieces, and we have the bottom, but it's in quite a rough shape. But eventually we hope to have it all put, or most of it, put back together, including the spittoon, and so people can actually see what a bank at that time was like. It was kind of shuffled around every time there was a remodel in the bank. And when the bank became First Federal Savings and Loan, you can see it had been completely moved and put in another place. And then when the Bank of Bentonville got that, it was sent to the Benton County Historical Society, and it had been in storage ever since then. That's where we were able to get it.
Henry Starr, this was his first bank robbery. He had been a bandit for quite a while.
I'm not going to judge people, bad guys, good guys, or whatever, because these are bad guys. But it's a really interesting story, and Henry Starr was interesting.
Henry Starr was born in 1873 at Fort Gibson in Indian Territory. They say Starr had pitch black hair and his eyes were just as black. He didn't drink liquor, he didn't smoke, and he didn't drink tea or coffee. When he was in jail, he always seemed to be a model citizen. He was always paroled early because he was such a model citizen. The governor of Oklahoma, of Indian Territory in Oklahoma at that point in time, pardoned him a couple times after he had robbed banks. He was apparently just a really nice guy, except for when he was robbing banks.
It wasn't so much about the money, it was about sticking it to the man, you know, kind of that kind of thing.
Henry had come to town himself about a week before the robbery.
He'd done a train robbery, and he had just pulled off his first bank robbery in Oklahoma in March. And so sometime after that, he came to Bentonville.
And he studied all of the ins and outs of town. He watched the bank.
When they opened and when they brought the money out of the vault, where all the guns were located in town, the movements of the town marshal. He memorized all the streets so that he knew different ways to go just in case one way got blocked and he had to go a different direction.
The problem was he felt like he had to go 15 miles in order to be safe. And that was 15 miles of open territory that he was going to have to get through before he felt like he was headed toward the Indian Territory, which at the time was only governed by U.S. Marshals. So he knew he would be safe once he got to the Indian Territory.
As he got beyond that 15 mile, it was more of a tree, hilly things where he could possibly defend himself a little bit better. And he wasn't too happy about having to ride this during daylight hours. And I think he planned his robbery a little bit later in the day so that if he needed to escape under the thing of dark, it wouldn't be too many hours before it would get dark and he could go that direction.
He traveled the road 15 times, he said, between here and the other side of Decatur where he felt like he'd be safe.
He had cased out the town, and he said he probably knew it better than anybody else at that point in time.
And so the day in June that he decided to rob the bank, he led out with one of his gang members in a wagon that had their rifles in it and had their horses tied to it. And the rest of the gang followed behind on their horses.
And there were 6 members of the gang. There was Henry Starr,
Frank Cheney,
Link Cumplin,
Bud Taylor,
Hank Watt,
Kid Wilson, and a guy named Happy Jack. Now, if that's not the greatest group to form an old cowboy gang, I don't know what is. Anyway.
And originally it was kind of decided that they weren't going to do the bank robbery. And they discussed it a little bit more. And it finally came down to a coin toss. They said heads, that they would go ahead and rob the bank, and tails, that they would not do the bank job. Well, of course, it came up heads. So they would go ahead and we're going to rob the bank.
It was a quiet June day in 1893 when Henry Starr and his gang walked up this street to rob this bank. Starr posted one man on the steps named Link Cumplin, who fired his rifle back and forth to keep the townspeople at bay. In the meantime, court was in session 1 block north. The sheriff was there but didn't have his gun. Ben Allison, who was the city marshal, lived northeast of the square. He went home and got his gun and started firing across the square from behind the bandstand at Cumplin, leaving these bullet holes that still remain today, and you can see them outside of what used to be the People's Bank building.
Down the south end of town. They were a brave bunch. They were not trying to hide from anyone.
Well, the day of the robbery, Henry Starr and Frank Cheney rode into town in advance of all the bank robbers.
They came into town either in a buggy or a wagon and had their weapons under the seat of the wagon or the buggy.
And the reason they did that was to hide the Winchesters that they were going to use that day in the bank robbery. Now, Winchesters were probably the best rifles you could get at that point in time. They were accurate rifles. They were used for hunting. There was just nothing to compare, and the guns that you probably find in town at that point in time were of no comparison to those. They also had their 6-shooters hid under their coats at that point in time.
They met a couple of citizens on their way into town, and they took them hostage because they were afraid they would tell somebody.
Those folks had kind of got suspicious that something was going on, so they brought them in with them.
They took them, forced them to go back into Bentonville with them.
They met at the alley behind the bank. So the bank had 2 different alleys. The bank sits on the corner.
They harnessed up their horses and they left Happy Jack there to take care of the horses and another guy to keep an eye on the back entrances to the buildings.
The next most important thing to a bank robber is to provide an easy escape.
Everyone in town knew that there was about to be a robbery because they saw them, anybody that saw them walking in knew that there was going to be a robbery.
At the Sun newspaper office, which was on the way, 2 of the employees were there, Maggie Wood and the editor, and they saw these guys coming, and I don't know if they saw their guns, their weapons, or what was going on, but the editor, looked at Maggie and said,
"Oh my gosh, they're going to rob the bank."
Before they could do anything, of course, it was too late.
Henry Starr and two of the other guys went into the bank, and Cumplin stayed on the steps out front.
He announced to everybody, "Get off the streets," and he shot into the air.
So once they heard the gun firing, they knew that something was up.
After that, anything that moved, he shot at, and he was hoping to keep the people of the town at bay until the bank robbery was over. I don't think that worked very well. I think that sent out an alarm to everybody in town that the bank was being robbed, and everybody ran to grab their gun.
The other 3 members went in the bank, started scooping the cash up off of the counters, and they had the cashier open the safe. So in the meantime, as the firing was going on, the town marshal was named Allison.
He lived not too far from the square, went and got his gun.
The sheriff was Galbraith. He was at the courthouse in his office.
And is credited with shooting Cumplin at least once.
So Allison made his way up to the bandstand, and he could see Cumplin firing his rifle back and forth. But he was in a good spot and had cover, so he could shoot back. He is credited with putting one of the dents in the pillars of the bank that are there today still.
Now, these gentleman pistols, as you would call them, were nothing comparatively to the Winchester rifles, but apparently they did a lot of damage that day.
They soon had the bankers at hand. They brought them out in shields and carefully armed and pulled down the money.
In the meantime, the Sheriff Galbraith had kind of gone around the south end, but supposedly his gun wouldn't fire. He had his deputy with him named Williams, and his gun wouldn't fire, and the joke was that it was too rusty because he didn't use it. Nobody had their gun on him again on that day.
There was a gentleman who owned the drugstore across the street, Mr. Croxdale. He had acquired a gun. He had gone out the back door and had gotten a couple shots off at the bank robbery. When he came back in the building, somebody asked if he had been shot because his knee was covered in red. Mr. Croxdale passed out. It ends up that he had knelt in red paint, and that was something he got teased about for the rest of his life.
Cumplin was yelling at the guys inside, telling them it was getting pretty hot outside, so they needed to hurry up and get their business done.
As they left the bank, they made the bank officials go in front of them, and they forced assistant cashier George Jackson to carry the bag of silver.
Mr. Jackson was hit by some stray shotgun shells, and he didn't know how bad he was hurt, but he was holding on to a bag of between $900 and $1,000 in silver.
Taylor Stone, who was a farmer who had come to town on business, was across the street at the drugstore. He came out with a gun and took a shot at him, and they shot him in the hip. He was the only person that was injured from the city that was actually shot.
They got down in front of the Sun office where Maggie Woods and the editor were, and Maggie, seeing what was going on, unlocked the door, opened it, and she either grabbed Mr. Jackson or she told him, "Come in here." And there was so much gunfire going on that the robbers didn't react quick enough. And anyway, they got him inside. He collapsed to the floor. They locked the door back, then took Mr. Jackson to a safe place where they could address his wounds, see how badly he was hurt. Maggie Woods then picked up that bag of silver, which probably weighed about as much as she did, and took it upstairs. And that's what the bank was able to open with the next day. They didn't have to close down the next day.
Taylor limped for the rest of his life after that. Mr. Taylor also said later on that he would have given $500 for a Winchester for 5 minutes that day.
So they made their way back south to where their horses were stashed. They left their hostages there and they took off to the west to try to make it to Indian Territory.
And a posse was organized and went into chased after them.
They basically had a running gun battle to Decatur. The Decatur officials helped out also, and but they made their escape.
They got away with $10,000, between 10 and 11, and that in today's money would be about a little over $400,000. So quite a haul for them.
Copeland had been shot to rags, according to Starr, but he did survive, and they made their way back to Indian Territory.
And we know that Frank Chaney was arrested in Oklahoma not too long after the bank robbery, and about a month later, Starr and Kid Wilson were arrested in Colorado Springs, Colorado.
All of the members of the gang met a grisly end except for one. All of them were killed within the next few years except for Henry Starr, who lived until 1921.
The Bentonville bank kept trying to get him arrested so he could be charged with the bank robbery in Bentonville. As a matter of fact, they spent all his life trying to rearrest him to get him tried on those charges.
Henry Starr ended up being shot and trying to rob the bank in Harrison in 1921.
But unfortunately, he just couldn't stay away from the criminal life.
The sheriff at the time in Bentonville went over to Harrison to get him to bring him back to Bentonville to be tried on the charges of the Bentonville bank robbery, but 4 days after he had been shot, he passed away.
Henry Starr took his final breath February 22nd, 1922. His last words, "I've robbed more banks than any man in America." Although the events of his crimes came to an end, his name and his story live on.
But it was, as they said, it was like a thunderclap. They were so surprised that anyone would try to rob the bank that they never really recovered. It's been 140 years, 135 years since then, and we're still talking about it. So
a lot of the people of the town showed a lot of bravery that day.
It was the moment in history for all of them, and they talked about it for the rest of their days.
I imagine a lot of these young men or older men had grown up in the Civil War or through a lot, and so were very defensive of their property, of the town, and very willing to give their life to save the community.
If somebody robbed a bank downtown right now, we'd probably talk about, especially if they were shooting back and forth on the street.
Bentonville, it was a totally different time at that point in time. Most people were making their living by farming. They were a much harder, rougher group than I think we are today, and I think a lot more resilient. And I think that's why you saw so much pushback against the robbers coming into town, that A lot of these farmers weren't hesitant to handle a gun and go after the robbers.
The heroics in the town says a lot about the character of the citizens, of the people.
Every time they met with adversity, they rose to that challenge and reinvented themselves.
I was born and raised here. My roots are here in a way that a lot of other people might not understand.
Going down to Lonesome Town.
That's the main thing about Bentonville that makes it unique in my mind, is it's always found a way to overcome adversity. A lot of towns don't. You can drive through this state and every state and see lots of towns that didn't make it.
All the struggles that we're working with now, or all the hopes that we have coming up, can always be referenced to what happened before, and you can gain just so much knowledge and understanding from learning what happened here before.
We have our history, and I always say that's a slice of time. Everybody has a slice of time, and they can't go back to it. So you have to leave that, set it aside, and move on. This is where we raised our kids, and this is where we went mountain biking, and this is where we went to Crystal Bridges, and this is where we went kayaking, or we went to Beaver Lake, or whatever. So, and enjoy it for what it is. It's still got a small town atmosphere, and absorb everything that's going on here, but build their own memories here. When they get old, they'll remember those things to tell their children and grandchildren.